In the autumn of 1888, London's impoverished Whitechapel district became a place of terror. Several women had been brutally murdered and mutilated, and these killings, now known as the Whitechapel murders, were soon attributed to an unknown killer who would come to be known as Jack the Ripper. His name originated from a taunting letter sent to the police, allegedly by the killer himself. To this day, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, but there are key facts that offer insight into his reign of terror. The first generally accepted victim of Jack the Ripper was Mary Ann Nichols, whose body was discovered on August 31st, 1888. She was followed by Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and finally Mary Jane Kelly. These women were all found gruesomely mutilated in secluded parts of Whitechapel. The killer's methods were disturbingly violent, yet showed a level of surgical precision, leading many to believe the murderer had some form of medical or anatomical knowledge. The Metropolitan Police were under immense pressure to solve the murders. Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline led the investigation. The police pursued hundreds of leads and interrogated numerous suspects, but the killer was never caught. At the time, investigative tools were primitive compared to modern standards. There were no fingerprints, no DNA analysis, and no CCTV footage to rely on. The investigation depended heavily on eyewitness testimonies, which were often unreliable in the dim, foggy streets of London. Despite these limitations, the police were able to establish certain patterns. The killer seemed to target vulnerable women, most of whom were involved in prostitution. He struck late at night or in the early hours of the morning, and his murders became increasingly violent with each new victim. The level of mutilation also suggested that the killer harbored deep-seated rage against women, possibly tied to some psychological trauma or obsession. Over the years, hundreds of theories about Jack the Ripper's identity have been proposed. Some of the most famous suspects include Montague John Druitt, a barrister who took his own life shortly after the last of the canonical murders, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber surgeon with a history of mental illness, and even Sir William Gull, Queen Victoria's physician, who was implicated in later conspiracy theories involving the British royal family. Modern advancements in forensic science have brought new scrutiny to these suspects. In recent years, DNA testing on a shawl allegedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder pointed to Kosminski, but the evidence has been widely contested by experts who argue the methods used were unreliable. The case of Jack the Ripper has captivated the public for over a century, inspiring countless books, films, and theories. The Ripper's ability to evade capture, despite the growing hysteria and heavy police presence, has only fueled the fascination with his story. What makes Jack the Ripper so notorious is not just the horror of his crimes, but the enduring mystery that surrounds his identity. Was he a disturbed local figure who blended in with the crowd, or someone of higher social standing who used their influence to cover their tracks? To this day, no definitive proof has been found to solve the case. The streets of Whitechapel have long since changed, but the shadow of Jack the Ripper still lingers, leaving behind a legacy of fear, speculation, and an unending search for the truth.